Hello and welcome to another one of our My Journey live streams. If you don't know me, I'm Colin McDonald. I've been in the games industry for about 30 years now, going back to Lemmings, Prince of Persia, Crackdown, Grand Theft Auto, and dozens of others that I'd rather not mention. If you've not been involved in any of our events before, Games Jobs Live events are regional recruitment events for the games industry, where we get a bunch of studios local to each area to present themselves, tell everyone a little bit about who they're looking for, how they work, and then we normally have a Discord running alongside where everyone can chat to the companies and hopefully apply and get jobs. These live streams are a little bit different. We don't have the Discord for chat running. Just put all your comments in the YouTube chat, and any questions you've got for our guests, just them in there, and we'll try and pick up as many as we can. If you want to find out more about the events that we're running, you want to get over to www.gamesjobs.live, and there you'll find details of the upcoming events we've got, as well as now some regional pages with some information about each area, summaries of these My Journey live streams, and an interactive jobs map where you can scroll around and see where all jobs are and all the different disciplines across the whole of the UK. We also do game jams. We just finished a game jam. If you've missed that and want to catch up, have a look on the YouTube channel and you'll see playthroughs in the award ceremony. And if you're interested in taking part in the next game jam, it's going to run over the summer. If you go to jam.gamesjobs.live, that'll take you straight to the itch page and you can find out all the details there. We've also started publishing some monthly reports where we've collated all the details on all the jobs going in the UK at the moment, and bundled that up, as well as for the interactive map on the website, into a report that will update month by month. So if you want to have a look at that, it's on our Discord, but you can also just download it direct from report.gamesjobs.live/March. If you do want to get on the Discord, it's discord.gamesjobs.live. All very straightforward. If you like these videos, please do like and subscribe. Usual request. The more people we can get knowing about these and following them, the more people we can attract. Speaking of that, we've got a few exciting guests lined up for future weeks. Next week, we're going to do this on a Thursday next week. We're going to move to Thursdays as of next week. So next Thursday, we have narrative designer Graham Goring. So he's going to join us next Thursday, the 25th of March at 4 p.m. the same time. So tune into the YouTube channel then to catch Graham and find out his journey through the games industry. But today, I'm delighted to say that we are looking at QA today, and we have a Mr. Nick Barratt, QA director, who's been in QA for games for, I think, 2 decades. We'll get him to verify that and tell us his story. Starting at Electronic Arts and now running his own company, Proper QA. So let me just bring in Nick. Nick.
Hey, Colin. How you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, that's a pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
No, not at all. And great to see you. You've done a better job than me. You've got the company T-shirt and the logo behind you and everything. Very professional. What we normally do with this that I think works quite well is sort of start at the end and find out what do you do at the moment. You're running Proper QA. What is that? What do you do? But then what we'll do is we'll jump back to the very start of your time in games, if you don't mind. But let's start with what is Proper QA and what you're doing at the moment.
Sure. Well, Proper QA is we're a service provider for the games industry. So our specialization is quality assurance. So we are, as we would say, the gatekeepers of quality. So we I mean, essentially what we do day to day is we partner up and work with lots of publishers and independent developers. They send us their games, we test them, we check them for them, make sure they're working the way they're supposed to be working, verify everything's as designed, and then try and smash them to pieces, and report back to the developers, and then they'll come back to us with updated versions, and it's a cyclical thing. And the way the company works is pretty much just that. We partner up with lots of different dev houses and publishers, and work independently, often alongside their own in-house QA, but as an independent service provider.
So you must get experience and get to work on a variety of different genres, platforms, business models.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when I think, as you said in the intro, I've been working for over 2 decades, for over 20 years, doing this. And sometimes when you're chatting with other people in the games industry and who've been in it at a similar time, and are proud to have racked up perhaps 10 titles that they've worked on, and and you hear the QA folks sort of snigger because I think I'm up to 500 different titles now on such a myriad of platforms and genres and devices, and not just fully fledged games either, sort of bits of tech for games. We'll also, last week we were testing just a piece of tech that runs AI for games, for lots of different gaming platforms. So it's a really broad, expansive profession to be in, and you're always on your toes. It's very, very rare that you get bored. Contrary to I think sometimes there's a stigma attached with QA that and it can happen that you might spend 6 months working on the same title, doing relatively repetitive work sometimes, but the reality is that we change and jump from one thing to another a lot more frequently than some other disciplines within the games industry, which keeps it entertaining for us, definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, there's obviously, I believe there's other QA companies. You are the biggest and best, as far as I'm concerned, obviously.
Thank you. Of course.
I believe in the interest of fairness, there's others. I mean, do the QA companies tend to specialize by genre, platform, anything like that?
No, I think the business model for my trade, for my business now as the service provider, a lot of our fellow QA providers, they try and be as broad as possible to just, as a business model, to capture as much as possible. Oh, you've frozen, Colin. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. I think there's some glitches going on. Keep going. I think it's recovering.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the model dictates. I think we are a relatively one of the smaller companies in headcount. So we kind of are by our nature a little bit more specialist. A lot of some of the bigger QA providers will try and cover sort of everything from translation and localization and all of those other little specialities that are all kind of under the QA umbrella. And we can do some of that, but some of those disciplines within the QA discipline are very specialist, and it takes a unique trained QA engineer to do some of those. So yeah, ours is, I hate the word niche, but we're or boutique, I suppose. It's a better expression. But we kind of try and stick to what we've been doing for years and years and years, for the last 10 years, and we know we're good at, without trying to expand beyond that. Yeah.
No, fair enough. And I mean, this is maybe a length of string question, but how long can you be working on a game for?
Well, yes. I mean, it depends on depends on the title, depends on the platform, depends on how many countries it's going to be localized into, depends on the length of development. But to give you an answer, I think the longest title I worked on one title exclusively was I think 5 years, and that was only unusual in the business model was a very clever one and a very it was right at the cutting edge, and the company decided to get QA involved at a really early stage, but at an appropriate level. So when we started testing that title, this was for Real-Time Worlds with you at
I've heard of that.
Yes, I thought you might have done. But the QA department started really early on, but were staffed appropriately. There were only 2 or 3 of us in the beginning, and towards the end, when we had something that was closer to release, that was when the main ramp up happened. In the last sort of year to 6 months to a year of development. But it is possible to get involved early, and that is an appropriate thing to do. And it's the sort of thing that my job is to try and convince developers and production teams to engage with QA as early as possible at an appropriate level. Not always a winning battle, but yeah, something we try and do as much as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, this is now quite a while ago now, but I mean, from memory, in terms of the size of team that we ended up with on APB, I mean, was it about 80, 100 people?
Yeah, I think
in QA.
Yeah, just in QA, and well, we ended up with sort of 2 personalities within the QA team. There was the black box test team, which is loads of bums on seats testing the game manually, but we also had a sort of one level of specialization, which was the embedded quality assurance team, and I think we had about 15 members of the team on that branch of QA at the time, and that's quite an exciting thing to get into if you're a QA tester, because normally it involves a level of specialization. So because you instead of sitting with the rest of the QA team, just geographically, physically, you'll be embedded within the development team in one discipline or another. So you might be assigned to the audio department or the art department or the design department, and you get to specialize and work a lot more closely. Although we work quite closely with the developers anyway, then you are, I mean, as the description, embedded. And I think it was about 15 out of the between 80 and 100 folks that we had in QA were spread out within the development team, which is a really good avenue for career progression too, because the likelihood of you progressing into the development side of the industry is heightened. If you're in QA, you have X amount of chance, but if you're in embedded QA, it's X plus something, just because you have more exposure, more face time with devs, and it's excellent business practice too to have QA embedded within your development teams. Yeah, definitely, there's positives.
Yeah. And we'll come back to this. I see there's been some questions already about, is QA a good way into the industry? And I think the short answer from both of us is probably going to be yes, but we'll come back. We'll come back and drill into that a little bit more. So before we get too bogged down in sort of mid-career projects, if we think of APB as that, let's go back to the very, very beginning. So the first time it crossed your mind you might end up working in games, when was that? How did that come about?
Yeah, it was a very unusual scenario for me. I grew up adoring games and spending loads and loads of time playing games. But I had at the time I had very, very little understanding of the games industry, or how games were made, how they were written. The first time I heard that expression, I write games, I had to have that clarified what that actually meant. It was a bizarre notion. And obviously I was aware of these huge games companies. But for me, prior to entering the games industry, I was working in restaurants and pubs as a cook, and very, very far away from the games industry. But a friend of mine at the time, he was a little bit older than I was, and he was running a catering company that went into big businesses, huge industries, and set up sort of in-house restaurants and catering operations, and for sort of banks and all sorts of big industries. And one day he called me and he said he'd landed a lead with a potential new client, and they were called Electronic Arts, and had I heard of them? Yes, I said yes. I know who EA are, and he said, okay, well I'm pitching to run their catering operation. They were building a huge new headquarters in Chertsey in Surrey, an incredible building. Same designer who built the Millennium Bridge, I think. And he told me all about it. It already sounded, too good to be. It was, fascinating and fantastical. And there was an artificial lake and a dozen swans from the Swan Sanctuary, and it sounded incredible. And he said, "Oh, will you come along and help out while I do the pitch to the bosses of EA?" And I was a little bit confused. I said, "Well, why on earth would you want me to come along?" And he said, "Well, I don't really know anything about games." And I sort of chuckled and said, "Look, I don't think they care about your Tetris high score. I think they're more interested, whether you can produce 500 meals every morning and every afternoon for their staff." Anyway, he wasn't to be convinced. So I went along, and that was a fascinating afternoon. I sat in this meeting utterly silent, didn't say one word, wasn't asked one question, but I did get to see their incredible building, and was instantly drawn to it and envious of what was going on. And in the end, my pal won the catering contract, and then went in. This was just before they opened the building and transferred all their staff over from what used to be Bullfrog and the Guildford offices. So I got to see that building just before it was sort of finished, and he asked me to go and work for him in the kitchen there. So I did, and within I mean, it was incredible. The staff are amazing. They're a great company to work. Although I wasn't working directly for EA, I was working for my pal's catering company, who we were catering for them. And my role was something called a theatre chef, which is a sort of a bit like a cocktail barman, but on a little cooking station, sort of in a meeting room, cooking for sort of the brass and the higher ups and managers of all the various departments in EA. So I got quite a lot of face time, with some of the higher ups, and I became sort of friends. It was very much a case of right place, right time. And I sort of became loose friends with some of the folks there. David Garner being one of them. He was running EA Europe at the time, and just overhearing the conversations that these folks were having during these business meetings, talking about projects and games, and I'm standing in the corner making omelets for them, trying to remain silent, pretending that I'm not listening. But the figures and the numbers that these folks were talking about were just fantastical to my ears. The numbers of concurrent users and revenue streams were like telephone numbers. And after 6 months, I said to one of them, I said, "Look, I think I'm on the wrong side of the fence. What does it take to do what you guys are doing? Because we're doing what I was doing. There was a relatively low cap on salaries, on wages, and in the games industry, there isn't a ceiling. The higher up you go, the numbers, you can just invent them yourself." And I thought it was a joke when the response to my query was, "Well, you can come and become a tester if you like, do QA." And I kind of laughed and said, "Look, what, testing video games? That's not a thing." And the response to that was, "Oh, yes, there is. We've got a building around the corner with 100 folks in it that do just that all day, every day." So yeah, it didn't take long for me to whip off my apron and go, I'm in, you know. So, and a week later, that was it. I was kind of rushed through an interview process, and I think I was very, very fortunate to be in the position that I was in. I don't think the exact same scenario would have happened nowadays. I would have needed more technical knowledge and a little bit more skill, or a little bit more of specific skills that lend to becoming a successful QA tester. But I did have at the time some of the work ethic and work drive and sort of problem solving skills that get you the foot in the door. If I didn't have the tech computer skills, in fact, on my first morning, an IT chap arrived and was setting up my workstation, and he said, "Okay, I was issued a Game Boy, not a GBA or a Game Boy Color, but an original Game Boy and a big box of batteries, and I was testing Formula One on the Game Boy back in 2000." And they said, "You might want to sit near the window, otherwise you'll get eye strain within a few hours." Okay. And then when they set me up with a utility machine with which to enter bugs into an online database, and he presented me with an ergonomic keyboard that had a split in the middle of it, so that your hands are like that. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, it's one of these new ergonomic keyboards. We're giving them to all of the new hires." And I said, "Well, that's just going to take me longer to move this finger from here over to there." And the guy just chuckled and said, "Oh, you QA boys have a great sense of humor," and wandered on. So I had to learn how to type quite quickly. But yeah, and that was how I got into games. It was sort of a mix of luck and right place, right time, and having the correct, sort of an appropriate mindset to say, to not be overwhelmed with it and say, okay, well, there's lots of other people doing this, perhaps I can too, and then getting on with it and doing it. Yeah, I found it was a fabulous, good, fun, engaging role to be in, and I ended up being quite good at a few aspects of it. The most important one, I suppose, was when we were doing collaborative tasks when we were testing. I was quite good at getting the team to all kind of pull in one way and collaborate well, and that was recognized, and I was sort of, but within 6 months or within a year, I think I was promoted to a senior tester. And then the journey from there to here.
So what's the difference between a regular tester, an entry-level tester, and senior tester? What was the difference?
It was quite a small difference, because there are half a dozen levels of tester, depending on the organization that you're working for. But a senior tester, the main role of a tester, well, I split it into two. It's half of it is finding bugs in games, and the other half is communicating those to the developer. And it is, a lot of people presume, understandably so, that our job is exclusively finding bugs. But yeah, it's documenting them and communicating them to the development team is at least 50% of it. And the senior tester's role is perhaps just slightly shoved more towards the communication, organization, and reporting side of it. You still perhaps spend 80% of your time testing with the rest of the team, but perhaps 20% of your day might be spent collating reports and organizing the team and distributing tasks, and organizing how your day is going to go on any given day or task within your normal workday testing a game.
Okay, so that's very conveniently answered Kieran's question there. Thank you very much for doing that without even being asked it. Excellent. And so then after that, because you were with EA for a number of years overall, weren't you?
Yeah, I think 6 or 7 years. I think it was a wonderful company to work for. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was my first foray into this industry and tech as a whole, and I absolutely loved it. We in QA there. I mean, at the time, crunch was a big thing, a big byword. You know, everyone was talking about it. We still do. But we in QA, because QA can be described as an entry level avenue into the games industry. We were less exposed to that because we're nominal almost always. The QA testers are paid hourly. We're not salaried. There's less of an expectation to do unpaid overtime. So although the levels of salary were lower than some other disciplines within the games industry, we were, I thought, treated really, really fairly. And yeah, I worked my way up through the various tiers of hierarchy within the QA department in electronic arts. You know, there was senior tester, lead tester, senior lead, and then up to sort of team leads, where you're running at that level. You start to run. So a senior tester will be, organizing the daily tasks. The lead above that might have 3 or 4 senior testers reporting into them, and they're then collating their information and passing that up. And then the team lead, you might have 2 or 3 teams of 10 or 15 numbers of testers, perhaps on different platforms. So you might be testing a franchise that's being released on Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation, and you'll have 3 separate teams. And as the team lead in QA, you'll be sort of looking after all 3. And you spend a lot less time actually physically testing, and a lot more time sort of just in the organizational aspects of it. I sort of worked my way up to that level. Unfortunately, the only, not so much a negative, but just a quirk of the way the department at Electronic Arts was structured at the time. And bearing in mind, this is 15 years ago, so it may well have changed now. I know they're always updating to try and do best practice. But at the time, there wasn't an enormous avenue for progression. Once you sort of got to the level that I'd reached within the QA department. I think stagnated is perhaps a bit of a strong expression, but I think I felt for the last couple of years that I was there that there was quite a rapid, over 5 years, if you can call that rapid, advancement to where I had got, and then the prospects above that were just more difficult to attain within the company, mainly because the structure of QA it is a triangular thing with lots and lots of folks at the base of the triangle supporting everything, and fewer people at the peak organizing things. So that's a normal, natural thing, which led me to eventually leave and seek other opportunities.
And how? I mean, of those people at the bottom of the triangle, if you like, I mean, obviously, as you say, there's not space for them all to progress, but equally, a lot of them maybe don't want to progress or don't have the aptitude to progress. I mean, do you see a lot of turnover? Do people come into the industry as a tester and do a period of months or years and then just move elsewhere? Do you see that quite a lot?
Yes, we do. I think more so than in perhaps any other discipline within the industry, and it's a double-edged sword. So, sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating when as you say, some people it's by choice. They'll pick up a role because it's advertised and they have the skill set to be successful in it. But it's perhaps not ultimately what they want to do. They might not want to get into the games industry at all, but they come and they test games for 6 months or a year, and then they leave, which is fine. It's the only frustrating thing for someone in my position is when you see someone do that and you know that they have real talent, and you think, oh, I wish you had the drive to stick with this industry rather than go off and do something in a different field. So there's that. But yes, there is some transient nature to it. Also, the project-based nature of the games industry now means that there's quite a lot of involuntary turnover. You know, there is attrition where staff are applying, being hired, and then leaving from their own volition, own free will. But also, you might have 50 or 60 testers on a project that then finishes, and if the company doesn't have another project that's going into that high volume QA phase right at that moment, then there's no work for those folks. I mean, my opinion is that's the way that the games industry as a whole has been heading for some time.
Oh, we've lost you, Nick. You've frozen.
Oh,
let's see if you come back. Yeah, you're back.
Oh, back. Sorry about that. Yeah, I once heard an analogy from Brian Ulrich, who was the development director at Real Time Worlds, and he said, if you remember how the movie industry was, 50 or 60 years ago, where there were a handful of enormous studios who owned the all the actors and all the equipment, and when an actor was they belonged to 20th Century Fox or whomever, and they would only make movies for them. And now, of course, each time a new movie is made, there's a team of directors and producers that are assembled. There's a load of acting staff and all of the other sundry staff beneath them assembled. And then at the end, when it's a wrap, they all dissipate and go on to other projects under different guises. And I think the games industry might be moving towards that model, or at least has been. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one of those where it's harder to see it from an engineering point of view, because companies are generally building up chunks of technology. They'll reuse that between projects, and there's a lot of embedded knowledge. But you see it a lot in art as well, art design. That some of these projects are malleable. I think.
Truly.
At the end of the day, you've got to have experts that know the company, know the project, and can be consistent throughout all of those. I think. I mean, I see a comment in QA in the comments at the moment about QA being more expendable than other disciplines, in a negative way, and I think, unfortunately, the nature of the work is probably it is a more transient role. At an entry level, at a senior level.
That's so. Yeah.
I mean, I know. I could probably name half a dozen people who are literal millionaires out of QA games. They've set up QA companies. They've gone on to run companies like Sumo Digital, and they've made absolute millions. So I think it's not true to say there's not money in QA, but I think as an entry level, it can be tough.
Yeah, and the career progression. I think I'd be inventing it if I were to try and put a percentage on. For instance, all of the QA testers that I've ever worked with, what percentage of those are still in the games industry 20 years later? But just to stick a finger in the air, it's probably along the lines of 10 or 15%. Sorry, not in the games industry, but still in the QA discipline. A greater percentage have gone on to other disciplines within the games industry, and I think that's one of the beauties of QA, because you can get into it. It can be used as a stepping stone. Sometimes it's a little bit of a frustration when folks have an idea that it's exclusively a stepping stone. It's just a way to get in, and not a career path in its own right. But I would say that because it's my thing. But also because that's not true. there are lots of folks who have made a career out of it, and it is a fascinating thing in its own right. But yeah, it's probably accurate to say of all the folks who have ever had a QA job for any length of time, if you added up that entire number, perhaps there's 10% of them have gone on to continue working QA, and another 10% have gone on to work in other disciplines. But I think a lot of that's by choice. If you get in, and hey, look, it's a fabulous way of figuring out what you want to do in the games industry. So, I've had lots of conversations with people studying various different games.
Oh, we've lost you again, but I mean, just to pick up on your point, Nick, while we're waiting for you to come back, as an entry level, I mean, I absolutely agree, and thinking back to Real Time Worlds, I was over the moon with the quality of the QA department we had, because most of the people were coming out with degrees out of university. We were on their doorstep, because a lot of them were coming through Abertay University in Dundee, so we had the most overqualified QA department going.
Yes.
And much as though it was a shame to see someone that had spent 4 years doing a programming degree not be able to go straight into a programming job, in actual fact it was their foot in the door, and the ones that were good, they quickly found a way to get to know the right people in the team. They were then in the door already when the position came up. So we had you lost a lot of people through internal promotion quite quickly.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that was, I remember someone saying to me, it must be frustrating and normally it's you lose the cream of your team. It's normally your best, some of the most qualified, most engaging, highly motivated folks. Those are the folks that are being promoted. But that's fabulous attrition. Never mind good attrition and bad attrition. That's excellent. If for nothing else, what a wonderful advert for getting people to come and apply to your games company rather than somebody else's. If you can publicize the fact that over the last 2 years, 10% of our QA team are now actively working in spread across every discipline within the industry in our company. That's a wonderful advert. But yes, I think you're right. The academia side of it will, just by its nature, always be a little bit, because the cutting edge of technology advances so quickly. The academic side of these folks going in and getting their degrees over, as you say, 4 years. And when they come out, what they're sold is get this degree and you'll be able to stroll in, to a programming job or a design job or a production management job. And often that's not strictly the case, but the difference is very often made up by a 6-month stint in QA. Get in, see how the thing actually works in reality. Live in a business sense, and they go, oh, right, okay, and then choose the discipline that you want to go into. For me, it was always QA. I just absolutely fell in love with what we were doing, problem solving and taking complex things and breaking them down into simpler tests, and then smashing them to pieces. And then smiling and presenting our handiwork to people, saying, "Look, here's this thing you made. We've broken it in novel, inventive ways." That's never grown tiring for me. That's always been a fun thing to do, a hobby.
Yep, and I mean one of the things I certainly saw a Real Time Worlds that actually the people that came up through QA, they ended up. Not only were they some of your best testers that you lost, but when they got into the discipline that they ultimately wanted to be in, they ended up being some of the best people there, because QA background gave them a really good grounding and appreciation. A game is multiple disciplines coming together, and if you're an artist that only cares about art and doesn't care about bugs and frame rate and level design, the game's not going to be very good. Whereas people that came up through QA knew that everything had to be good. So actually, it's really easy for people to be dismissive of other disciplines, but people from QA have a much better perspective on that.
Yeah, I agree, and you see that in the sort of friendly rivalry, the camaraderie between disciplines within a games company. You know, the bickering between art and design and code and audio, and everyone has an elevated, or not elevated, but everyone has a you know, a sense that the thing that they're working on is hyper important, which of course, you know, everything is very important, and you want the people working in those disciplines to feel that way. But when pitched against someone else, you often, as you described it, you can have a little bit of a blinkered or a narrow perspective of the game as a whole, whereas a tester doesn't. They see the thing as a homogeneous, you know, a monolithic thing. And then when you progress up into another discipline, you tend to take that with you. And you, some of those preconceptions or some of those learned ideas that you get if you hadn't had that experience in QA, you might not ever experience. And I think it is a very positive thing, very much so.
Yeah. Just jump out. There's a question here from Andrew, who I know well. Just asking about, you know, you know, we're talking about QA being a great entry level, regardless where you want to end up in the games industry. But what background do you need to get into QA in the first place? I mean, obviously, you didn't have any, basically, in terms of game, other than a passion, which is important. But I mean, these days, how important is it that someone has something that says qualification or experience in games on their CV?
Yes, I mean, it's. I think that the obvious thing is it's definitely an advantage. Absolutely, of course, that's just logical. However, it isn't essential. It's not a necessity. I mean, I've hired, I don't know, perhaps 500 testers over the last 20 years, and again, I'd be inventing it, coming up with a percentage of those people who had zero background in games, but. You know, anecdotally, I mean, I hired a guy who was a tank commander in the Turkish military. Last week, I hired a guy, Tim, who's he works in stage animatronics. So as long as there is a crossover skill, that's the important thing, because. As I said earlier, you know, the two sort of basic disciplines at an entry level within QA are the finding bugs and reporting bugs. So if you have an inquisitive mind that you're good at problem solving, you know, I mean, you don't. A lot of people say to me when I first tell them what I do, they say, "Oh, you must be excellent at video games," and you know, I laugh because I'm appalling at many genres of games. You know, I can. There's a couple of games that I think I'm okay on until I go online, and then, you know, get very disappointed when I get owned immediately. But it's not about being talented at playing games, although obviously it would help. It's the discipline of QA is about a problem-solving mindset, and working collaboratively with others, and being diligent and getting test coverage, as we call it, over the entirety of the part of the game that you've been assigned to test, and because of that, a background in a different field, or indeed no background, indeed, you know, someone who's come out of education and hasn't ever done any work before, that's not a definitive fixed barrier to entry. It's as long as you get a hiring manager or an HR department that's willing to actually look at your application and see what you've written, and see that you've demonstrated that you have the sort of skills that would enable you to be successful in the role. Having a qualification is definitely not a requirement. You know, it's a benefit, and yes, you know, I'll admit it, those people who do have qualifications and in my discipline those are the CVs that I read first. You know, that's just normal. But it's not a full barrier to entry, not in the slightest.
So what else can people do? Someone that maybe doesn't have a qualification or does, but wants to help them stand out. I mean, can they, you know, for most disciplines, I usually recommend people getting involved in game jams. It's why we do them, because I think they're a great way of, you know, practice makes perfect. You get better at your trade, and you've got something to put in front of companies. Are game jams worthwhile, or is there anything else you should be doing?
Yes, for game jams specifically for QA, I would, as a hiring manager, I would view those as, okay, that person obviously has a strong interest, because they've done that, they've given up their time and they've gone and done that, and they've you know, hopefully got to the end and participated, and that's fantastic. But for if it was a choice between a candidate who'd done that and a candidate who'd participated in a load of open beta testing programs, so there's lots and lots of those that you can get involved in. And if I suppose, I mean, even with qualifications, but especially if you haven't any direct qualifications that would stand out on a CV that you're sending to a games company, get involved in a beta. And I suppose the important thing is the demonstrable fruit of your labor. So if you can get involved in a beta and you can help find a bug, and then if you can get through to interview phase, or even in your application, mention that, you know, say, I participated in these beta tests, and these were the things that I discovered, and that will stand out often above someone who perhaps hasn't done that, but does have a qualification. The practical application of your skill base is paramount. It's sometimes more important. You know, I once had a chap who was studying games art and design, I think, at Abertay, but he dropped out after 2 years. Because he wanted to get into the industry, which I could sort of understand. And we had another chap who had done a 4-year degree in Latin. And I mean, I'm not sure what the career options are open to someone who's you know, studied Latin for 4 years, probably Latin teacher, and you know, or naming new flowers. But the fact that person had finished their degree of 4 years in a subject that perhaps after 10 minutes of arriving at uni, they went, what have I done? You know, and they stuck through it for 4 years. To me, that was the person that could, if you give them a boring QA task for a week, that person's going to stick with it and get through to the end. And to me, that was a better qualification than 2 years experience on a course that they dropped out of. And I'm not you know, being negative on people who drop out of for a myriad of reasons, but it was just to highlight the fact that the qualification itself isn't always the be all and end all of the way that you can enter the industry.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the challenges of the games industry, almost in a flippant way, is coming up with game names. And quite often we end up taking words, looking them up in Latin, and seeing if we can get inspiration. So that fellow could have named countless names, games names. Cool. One question back at the start. I've lost it. Just in terms of how QA has changed over the 2 decades you've been in it.
Yeah, it's quite an expansive question, because QA itself, the way that we approach QA tasks hasn't really, the discipline in itself hasn't really changed, although it has modernized and evolved. The things that we're looking at, the pieces of software, the games, they have changed so vastly from 20 years ago. And that is what pushes us to have to not so much innovate, but be more thorough, get involved earlier. I think perhaps 20 years ago, QA was a thing that you did at the end of a project, just to check that everything was working perfectly, because the software was a much simpler thing 20 years ago. I mean, it was still very, very complex. Now the software is so complex, and QA has just become, the nuts and bolts of doing the QA hasn't really changed. You know, I mean, I often make the comparison with, you know, if you wanted to test the software that ran an ATM machine, which would be very boring to do, but the approach that you would have for that isn't really any different to testing a new piece of VR gaming. You know, the focus and the test approach that you take are broadly similar, but of course, it's you just have to throw a lot more of it at a project and at different stages and get in earlier. But yeah, the actual QA process, the nuts and bolts of turning up to work and sitting down and testing a thing, hasn't really changed an awful lot over the last 20 years. I mean, that's a very high level synopsis, but it's broadly true, I think.
Okay, we're running out of time that we've got you left for,
wow.
Unfortunately. But let's see what other questions want to pick up on. Someone asking about no industry experience. Should they volunteer to test for free?
I mean, as a technique to get yourself noticed, perhaps, but no, I don't think anyone should work for free. If there's a requirement for using your talents, then you should be rewarded for that. You should be paid for that. I know it's very tempting, especially if you're sitting there and you've made some applications and perhaps you've heard nothing back. But no, I'm very against people doing things for free. I mean, it's slightly different in an internship, perhaps, where there's a reciprocal thing where you know you're in return you're being trained in a discipline or something else. But yeah, it's a difficult one. That my heart would say no, but I suppose talking about the application process. Tailor your applications to the company and to the products that they're making. And if your application doesn't gain a response, apply again. There's a bunch of reasons why a hiring manager or an HR department might not respond immediately, positively or negatively to an application, and just keep pestering them. You know, 2 or 3 applications to the same company, not a bad thing. I mean, it's just keep on it, keep pestering them. But yeah, I don't know, Colin, what do you think? Should you apply to?
I'm kind of of the same mindset that, you know, at the end of the day, if you're desperate to get in and willing to work for free, that might have its place. But generally speaking, I think as companies, we shouldn't be doing that. I think if people are working, they need to be paid. I guess there's borderline cases where I've had people say, you know, they've applied and we said, no, sorry, we just don't have a vacancy. And they said, well, but I just want the experience. I'll work for free. And you're saying, well, we're not advertising the job. We're not misleading anyone, but it still just feels inherently wrong. So I would rather find a different way of working with that person. But you have to figure out what's right for yourself. But generally speaking, I also think there's an angle where people get valued more when they're being paid.
Truly,
you know, I think if you offer a service for free, it's just not valued as much as if someone's put their hand in their pocket for it. And I think that goes for paying salaries as well. So it's maybe a last resort, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, I had one experience a few years ago where an applicant said their initial application had gone unanswered because I mean, I looked at their CV and they weren't really. We had much better applicants for that particular vacancy, and they after a week they reapplied and said, I'll work for a week for free. If you think I'm any good, then pay me. If not, don't pay me. And that I pondered that in the pub that evening, thinking, wow, is that a moral conundrum, purely moral, or
Yep.
I mean, in the end, I responded to that person and said, look, thank you very much for the application, but we've hired, and it's not, it's no longer open. But that was a weird, unique that had never happened before, and I don't know. I mean, it certainly got my attention, but
Yep.
I'm not sure I'd recommend that to.
No, and I think most people, if they've got a passion for if they're persistent, your point earlier about multiple applications, that's absolutely fine. I mean, not every day or every week to the same company, but I think if you're passionate, persistent, show aptitude, you will get in the industry. You might have to look at different routes than you were initially hoping for, but
yeah, and I mean, when you speak to HR folks, they will almost always say to you that the interview process itself, the hiring procedure, is purely objective. You find an applicant who has the requisite skills, can do the job, and then irrespective of any other influencing factors, you can hire them. Which, yes, legally and from an HR perspective, that is sort of broadly true. But in the real world, when you're applying to other human beings, there is some more subjectivity than that. And I think that's what we're talking about. The person who applies a second time says, "Oh, I don't know if you saw my first application. I just thought I'd check is the role still open," or something like that. That then registers in the hiring person's brain, and just has raises another little flag, perhaps.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but we've got a handful of questions we'll not got to yet. So, lightning answers.
Okay.
One sentence answers, if that's possible. Some of these are big questions. What do you like to see on someone's CV when someone applies?
Oh, succinctness. Don't write a 5-page CV. 1 page, plenty.
Perfect. And then similar question, but once someone's in the role, how does someone in QA stand out best to make themselves be considered for promotions?
Yeah, that's very difficult to answer in one sentence. I suppose the quality of their reporting, if not finding a bug isn't necessarily a negative point. Spending 2 days looking for one bug, that's forgivable if the report is flawless and perfect. That is our conduit between QA and the development team is our reporting. If that is absolutely flawless every single time, you will stand out.
Fair enough. And then jumping back to the money side of things, what can people expect? This isn't particularly about proper QA. That wouldn't be fair to ask you, but just generally, if someone's coming in entry level QA, what can they expect to
earn? If you're working for a company, a development company, so if you're working for a games company with their internal QA, the salary or the wages will be ever so slightly elevated. You perhaps expect around £8.59 an hour for an entry level QA role. If you go and work for one of the bigger agencies, you will almost always be on a 0-hour contract at around minimum wage. We don't. We pay a bit more than the living wage, but that's the expectation. Also, in QA for a publisher or a developer, you will normally be at entry level again. You'll be on a fixed term contract, or maybe even a 0-hour. But once you rise through the tiers of QA, if you're a senior or a team lead, then you might expect a permanent contract with an appropriate salary attached.
Great stuff. Okay, so we've not got through every question, but we've kind of covered the bases of most of the ones that have come in. And I guess one final one from me, in terms of someone's first day in a QA job, what does that first day entail, and how long is it? You know, when you see someone come in thinking, "Wow, this is the best job in the world, I'm playing games." How long until the light bulb goes on and they're like, "Oh, it's not quite just playing all my favorite
Yeah.
games whoever I want."
I mean, it's dependent on what project you're assigned to, whether that light bulb is extinguished with a sledgehammer in the first 10 seconds or is burning brightly for the next 6 months. But yeah, it's there are. I don't think it's a one day thing. I think it sometimes it can take 6 months before you're jaded by the slog of being on projects that perhaps you wouldn't have chosen. You know, they're not your favorite game genre, for instance. But yeah, the first day for all testers, I think, is a fabulous, exciting, terrifying thing, where you go and you go, I can't believe I'm doing this, this wonderful thing and part of this incredible industry. Yeah, I think it takes a while for that to wear off, if it does indeed wear off. It never has for me.
Yeah, no, I know plenty of people it doesn't have. Sorry, that was a cynical question, but and the same is true of any, you know, any profession, any industry. It's not all it's cracked up to be. My job, I keep telling people, my job is essentially emails, meetings, and spreadsheets. But just somehow, because it's all towards making something I'm passionate about, those emails, meetings, and spreadsheets are so much more bearable than if we were making a database or a financial system or something.
Yeah, truly, I feel exactly the same. Part of my role now is to, now we're all working from home, we no longer work in the office. Part of my role is now motorcycle courier, taking various devices and bits of equipment between all the testers' houses, which is great. Gets me out of the house. Fantastic fun.
The motorcycle courier. Now that sounds like my dream job. I'm sure that. Brilliant. Nick, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
It's been a pleasure.
Fascinating. I see, I see various comments coming up. People saying it's helped them a lot. It's answered their questions. Thank you for the incredible insight. Thanks for answering so many of the questions. So much appreciated on behalf of everyone. Thank you very much, Nick. Just while I remember, your company, Proper QA, is properqa.com. Are you looking for anyone at the moment?
We've just taken on 4 new staff in the last 2 weeks. Applications always welcome. We never know, because of the nature of our particular type of the industry, we never know when we're going to get more work coming in. So yeah, apply. I always hold on to every CV that we get. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So on that note, that brings us to the end of the live stream for today. We are back next week. It's Thursday next week. So it's Thursday, the 25th of March. We've got narrative designer Graham Goring. So join us again on the Games Jobs Live YouTube channel, 4 p.m. next Thursday, to hear from Graham, find out how he got into the industry, which, if Nick thinks he was lucky, I think Graham is 100 times more so, in his own words. So we'll hear more about that next week. And meantime, if you want to find out more about other Games Jobs Live events, reports, maps, etc., get onto the website, which is www.gamesjobs.live. So, Nick, thank you very much again, and we'll hopefully see you in person before too long.
Absolutely. Cheers, Colin. Thank you.
Right. Cheers. Bye.